On a sunny and frosty morning, people who emerged from their homes in the town of Exmouth, located at the mouth of the Exe River, which flows into the Lyme, saw strange tracks clearly delineated on the freshly fallen snow. The tracks resembled the prints of small hooves. The inhabitants of the town became alarmed, and some were gripped by panic, believing that the Lord had truly turned away from them, and therefore the devil himself had come to visit them. When the confusion somewhat subsided, the most balanced and prudent townsfolk began to examine the mysterious tracks. According to popular opinion, no known animal in these parts could have left them, although, in principle, the tracks were somewhat reminiscent of those left by donkeys. Each of them was 10 centimeters long, 7 centimeters wide, and the distance between two adjacent prints, which was exactly the same everywhere, was 20 centimeters. But the most astonishing thing was that the tracks stretched along a perfectly straight line, as if on a thread, and therefore they could only have been left by a creature that moved on 2 legs. The tracks also had another inexplicable feature. Although the snow that fell overnight was soft and fluffy, each print was covered with a thin layer of ice, which gave it high clarity. Such prints could only have appeared if the hooves or whatever left these prints had been in the snow for a very short time and were hot at the time. When people decided to trace the route of the 2-legged hoofed creature's walk, they encountered another puzzle. The even chain of tracks, not deviating a centimeter from a straight line, crossed fences, climbed onto the roofs of houses, and haystacks 3 meters high. In one case, the tracks remained on a roof gutter for collecting rainwater, and in another, on the narrow ledge of the second floor of a house. And in all these unlikely situations, the length of the stride remained the same, 20 centimeters. In this manner, the unknown creature passed through Exmouth and headed north, then abruptly turned west at a right angle, crossed the mouth of the Exe, 3 kilometers wide, to the other bank, then again turned south, reached the town of Teignmouth, and came out onto the shore of the ice-covered Bay of Lyme, where the tracks abruptly stopped. But tireless trackers discovered them on the opposite shore of the bay. Once again on land, the creature headed southwest, and passing through a series of villages and settlements, traversing snow-covered fields and pastures, arrived in Bichton, one of the districts of the city of Totnes, where the tracks suddenly disappeared. The total length of the mysterious traveler's route was over 160 kilometers. In one of the church parishes through which the 2-legged hoofed creature made its way, the local pastor, the Reverend Margrave, calming the agitated parishioners, assured them that nothing special had happened and that the tracks in the snow were left by a kangaroo that had escaped from the zoo. The only problem was, the pastor couldn't explain where the kangaroo got hooves from and how it managed to walk 160 kilometers in one night in freezing weather, hopping over fences and climbing onto roofs. Local experts offered other, no less convincing explanations. They said that the tracks belonged to a lame rabbit, a toad, an otter, a giant bird that flew in from the mainland, and other absurdities of the same kind. More than 150 years have passed since this mysterious incident, but its enigma remains unsolved, and it still attracts the attention of scientists, professional researchers, writers, journalists, and simply curious people. And they often find new documents, written testimonies of eyewitnesses, old newspaper publications that help to get closer to solving the mystery and give reason to propose new versions of what happened. One of the most important documents related to the incident under consideration is the fragments of the book Riddles and Notes from Devon and Cornwall, written by the daughter of the pastor from the village of Dawlish, Henrietta Fursdon, and published at the turn of the 1850s and 1860s. The tracks appeared at night. Since my father was a pastor, other spiritual people from our Anglican diocese came to him, and together they all reasoned about these unusual tracks that could be seen all over Dawlish. The tracks had the shape of small hooves. Inside some of them, claw prints could be seen. One chain of tracks stood out sharply on the snow-covered churchyard, stretching from the threshold of our house to the vestry. Another one approached the wall of the columbarium, stopped in front of it, and then continued on the other side. Many similar tracks were also found on the roofs of houses in different parts of the town. In the autumn of 1957, an article by paranormal researcher Eric Dingwall titled "The Devil is Again at Large" appeared in the magazine Tomorrow. In it, Colin Wilson recounted how in the summer of 1950, on one of the deserted beaches of Devonshire, he saw strange hoof-like prints on the smooth and firm surface of wet sand trodden by the sea waves. The prints appeared completely fresh and very clear, as if they were cut with a razor or stamped with some sharply sharpened instrument. The distance between the prints was about 180 centimeters, and they were much deeper than those left in the sand by Wilson's bare feet. And he weighed over 80 kilograms. The strange tracks led from the very edge of the water, but there were no return tracks to the water. At the same time, it seemed that the tracks appeared just a few minutes before Wilson arrived. If he had come to the beach just a little earlier, he might have come face to face with the Devil of Devonshire. Later, Wilson joined the ranks of investigators of the Devil Mystery, and in 1979, his book, The Occult Mysteries, was published in London, where in a chapter dedicated to the Devil of Devonshire, the author writes, "The tracks looked as if the creature was searching for something. It wandered around the backyards of houses and on roofs, and it seemed completely unfamiliar with human life." Furthermore, Wilson reports a real sensation. One of the correspondents of the newspaper Illustrated London News quotes a fragment from the notes of the famous British polar explorer James Ross, dated May 1840. When Ross's ships anchored near one of the islands of the Antarctic Kerguelen archipelago, the members of the expedition were surprised to see hoof prints on the snow-covered shore. They followed the direction of the tracks, but soon reached a snow-free rocky elevation where no tracks were visible. The appearance of hoof prints in these places was completely inexplicable, as there were no hoofed animals on these islands. In our time, the events described above have received an unexpected and amazing continuation. It turned out that one of the members of Ross's expedition, a certain Clark Perry, after being discharged from the British Navy, settled in Devonshire County, in the coastal town of Teignmouth mentioned earlier, located about 10 kilometers southwest of Exmouth. In 1980, among the papers of the late Clark, his diary and a daguerreotype, an old photograph, were found, on which Clark himself was depicted holding some incomprehensible spherical object. As for the diary, from its regular and detailed entries, the following picture of events emerged. The object Clark is photographed with is a metallic sphere brought by him from Kerguelen. According to Clark, James Ross deliberately omitted the fact that on the island, in addition to unexplained tracks in the snow, two strange metallic spheres were found, one of which was intact, and the other was broken into pieces. Moreover, the hoof prints started precisely from the fragments of the broken sphere and led from it in a perfectly straight line to a rocky hill. In Clark's opinion, the spheres they found fell from the sky, and he adds that during their stay on the island, he constantly felt the presence of some invisible observer who never took his eyes off the members of the expedition. When the expedition ships set course for Tasmania, both mysterious spheres intact and broken were in Clark Perry's seaman's chest. However, when other sailors found out what souvenirs Clark was bringing from Kerguelen, they were seized with superstitious fear and began to persuade Clark to throw the spheres overboard. However, he did not listen, and then the sailors demanded that Clark, along with his spheres, leave the ship as soon as they arrived in Hobart, the main city and port of Tasmania. This time, Clark complied, and after some time he signed on as a sailor on another passing ship, which safely arrived in England in the autumn of 1842. This time, during the entire voyage, he did not utter a word to anyone about what lay at the bottom of his chest. Clark settled in Teignmouth, found himself a job on the shore, and hid the chest with the mysterious souvenirs in the basement of his house, where they lay undisturbed for 13 years, until February 3rd, 1855. On that fateful evening, Clark returned home in the company of several friends, and they were all quite drunk. The revelry continued, and in his intoxicated state, Clark let slip to his friends about the spheres. They immediately wished to inspect the overseas curios. Everyone descended to the basement, and Clark retrieved the spheres from the chest. Unanimously, it was decided to open the intact sphere. Each one took turns hammering away at the sphere with a heavy hammer. After one of the strikes, a scraping sound emanated from inside the sphere, and a crack appeared on its surface. Clark instantly sobered up, escorted his friends out of the house, and went to bed. As he prepared for work the next morning, Clark noticed that the crack on the surface of the sphere had noticeably widened, realizing that the souvenir could shatter at any moment. After this, contrary to his usual habit, there were no entries in the diary for several days, and then on February 7, 1855, only one phrase was recorded, stating that on that day, Clark would throw the spheres into the sea on the beach in Teignmouth, and then head to Exmouth, where he would spend the weekend with his friend. This is where Clark Perry's diary ended. In conclusion, it is worth adding that at various times in the press, there were reports of the appearance of traces of mysterious bipedal creatures in the snow or on sandy beaches not only in Devonshire and on Kerguelen, in Scotland in the winter of 1839 to 1840, Times newspaper of March 13, 1840. In Poland in 1855, Illustrated London News of March 17, 1885. In Belgium in 1945, Doubt Magazine No. 20 for 1945. And in Brazil in 1954, Bernard Heuvelmann's book on the track of unknown animals.